Cool. Just so everyone knows that they're in the right room, or if you're not in the right room, the doors are still open, and I won't consider it rude if you leave. Sorry. I'm just going to set a timer so I know how we're doing for time. And then I will get started. So, okay. Hi, good morning. I'm Maddy, and hopefully you are all in the right place for how to playtest a story. And this will be a talk about how we prototyped and playtested the narrative in my studio's game, Call of the Golden Valley. Okay. So overview, this is what's on the box. I'll explain who I am and what the game is and why I felt compelled to talk about this. Why we test story, because I think this is something that's overlooked a lot, either because it's too wiggly and people don't know how to do it, or maybe a little bit of the like, I am the auteur, this is my story, and the people will love it and realize I'm brilliant. But I think you can test anything if you're clever enough about it. Why the conventional wisdom of just gray box it, man, doesn't work. And then once I've hopefully convinced you that you want to test your stories and that you should be testing your stories, I'll explain sort of my theory of story and how that wraps into how we test it, and then some very concrete tips for how to do it. Also some examples of developer tools that we set up for really rapid narrative prototyping without having to go into the code, which makes it very quick. And hopefully leave like 5-10 minutes for questions at the end. So that's where we're going. So this is me, creative director and founder of Osora Studios. We're based in Melbourne. And as you might notice from my accent, I don't sound Australian. That's because I come by way of America. My background is maybe not the super typical indie background. So I have degrees in cognitive science and computer science. I went and worked at Google as a back-end engineer on Google Maps and other things. I got pretty tired of that and took the gap year that I never took when I was 29 and went to be a ski instructor at Mount Buller. We do have ski mountains in Australia. New Zealand's are prettier, but we have them in Australia. And then I started messing around with Unity during that time. We got caught in a couple lockdowns and you just really can't be a ski instructor remotely. So started messing around with Unity, and every morning I was riding the staff bus up and down the mountain at dawn and dusk, and all the snow gums and the fogs, and it was just so atmospheric, and one thing led to another, and now I run an indie studio making a game about people who go missing in the high country of Victoria. So this is really a lockdown project that got completely out of hand, but I'm happy to say that in 3 weeks and 3 days we are shipping the game. So it's happened, yeah. And just a little bit of background about the studio. So I've been the only person on it full-time throughout development, and it's been about 3.5 years of that. At other points, we've probably had between 7 and 8 people coming in and out on various employment configurations. But as far as, I think what's important to know for this talk is that I did 100% of the narrative design and writing, and I did about like 97% of the programming on this project. So I'm speaking with a narrative designer and writer hat on, but I'm also speaking with an engineering hat on, and you'll see both of those, and note that neither of those are designers, so the slides are gonna look like a back-end engineer / ski instructor made them. I'd be curious though, for show of hands in the audience, who considers themselves like a narrative story person, just so I know who I'm talking to. Cool. Who considers themselves an engineering developer person? Cool. And then does anyone consider themselves something that isn't one of those two? If those people, when you put your hands down, if you're an artist. Okay, so we still got a couple, I'm curious. Producers? Yeah, okay. So good smattering of people, and I think we'll have something for everyone. So just so we know what we're talking about, this is the game Call of the Golden Valley. It's about people who go missing in high country Victoria, specifically your friend. And I'll just play the trailer because that will explain it better than me, and this is about a minute long.
Well, I guess I'll see you tomorrow in Phillipston at the pub.
People underestimate the bush. Simple as that.
Are you sure you still want to go? You might not like what you find in there.
Marissa, this isn't funny.
So yeah, that's the game, just so we know what we're talking about. So it is, I would say it's a very narrative forward game, but it definitely is 3D. You walk around, it has mechanics. So it's not a visual novel. I would say it's a 3D game with very forward, very story forward. So why should we test story? I found out last night that both these games were made by BioWare, and I actually don't have a grudge against BioWare. I'm not a huge AAA person, but right, we can all think of many AAA games that people invested tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into. It was very pretty, it was very cool. The monsters were scary, the characters were cool and did cool animations. And then it just kind of falls on its face because people didn't like the story. Specifically, I think with like franchises that people have specific expectations about what the narrative is going to be. And then people get mad and they write angry reviews on the internet. So, I mean, this is just good business sense, right? If you're going to drop $100 million on a game, of all the things to trip it up, like, don't let it be the story. In all, like, I say this as an engineer. Of all the things in a game that are like relatively easy to fix and relatively cheap to fix, if you get the information at the right point, it's fairly easy to change up some of the writing. But then people are like, yeah, but narrative's dead, man. Like, we don't want it. I would argue it's not. I think, you know, people have different opinions on this, but I think most of these Game of the Year games, people would say have very strong narratives, and that's usually what gets people talking about them. So I think kind of at any scale, narrative is make or break for your game, and especially at the indie scale, because we cannot make our games look as good or have as much content as Baldur's Gate 3, right? We can't compete on that. What we compete on is heart, and that people like get the warm fuzzy feelings of finding an indie game that really resonates and makes them feel seen. And again, $100 million actually won't buy it for you. It's something that you have to do yourself. So I think story makes or breaks games, even if you're not, but you're like, oh, I'm not making a visual novel. Your game still has a story. It's a thing that the player like experiences from beginning and end. So as I said, I don't come from a game design background, and when I was stuck in ski instructor lockdown, I'm kind of like, all right, I'm gonna make a game, how do I test it? And everyone's on YouTube is just like, just gray box your gameplay loop and iterate till it feels really good, man. Like, I don't know. Like, I found this screenshot and this was me testing out the dialogue system. It's like, I'm talking to a refrigerator? Like, this doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And even if I did this for the entire game, and you run around and you talk to all the different refrigerators about your missing refrigerator friend, like, that's not the game, and that's not gonna give people the feelings that the final game will. So I think the core problem of testing a story is that story games aren't done until they're done, right? Like, let's refrigerator man to, you know, we got the UI and the light and the expression and all of that. There's so many things going on here. So they're really like asking people like, hey, what did this make you feel doesn't make sense, right? They're like, I'm talking to a refrigerator. It said good day. Not a thing. But you do need to test them before you're done. Otherwise, you've spent $100 million on something that no one really wants to play and it doesn't land with people. So this is what I felt like was the crux of this problem, and this is what the rest of the talk hopefully addresses. So this is where we get into kind of my theory of story. So this is a great quote by an American writer, Maya Angelou, that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think anyone who has ever tried to explain like the plot of their favorite game or book to a friend when you're recommending it, and then you realize, actually, there's some big gaps there, but you know you love it, right? You know you love it, you remember how it touched you. I would also say anyone who has like a long-running family feud, which has been going on for like 20 years, and no one can actually remember what happened or didn't happen, but they remember that everyone's really angry about it. I definitely think that as humans, we forget the details, but remember how it made it feel. So I will admit that maybe I've brought you here under false pretenses, and this is actually a talk about how we playtest feelings, because I think we tell stories to evoke feelings, not to have the super detailed plot points. And so the rest of this talk will really be, how do you find out that your game is evoking the feelings that you want people to have? And the theory is that if it evokes the feelings that you want people to have, then your story is landing the way you want it to, and it's resonating with people. And, you know, hopefully, profit game of the year, BAFTA, Emmy, all of it? Yeah. So I'm going to take a little left turn for a while, but I promise I have a point. But I think it's easier to talk about this not in games, because games are super multidimensional and wiggly. So this is a painting called Morning Sun by Edward Hopper, who was a really good mid-century American artist who painted a lot of scenes of just everyday life. And this is a little exercise for the audience, and I'd like us to take 10, 15 seconds to just contemplate this and try to feel what this evokes for you. Like, what feeling do you get when you look at this? But if that's a little too woo, and you're like, not here for that, at least think about, what do I think is happening here? Who is she? What's she thinking about? Why is she in this room looking out that window? So I'm going to give everyone 15 seconds to meditate on that. Okay, cool. So I want you to keep that in your mind, and now I'm going to show you a few different versions, and I want you to think how this changes it. So what if we see it in black and white? Does this change the feeling? Does it change the story? What about, and this was a total abuse of Canva, and I'm sorry, I told you I wasn't a designer. What if we don't have those dark shadows and the nice like light coming in, and you know, it's just more of a flat room? Does that change anything? Again, not a designer. What if she's looking at trees instead of cities? Does that change the vibe? Does that change what we think the story is here? What if it's this really nice, kind of happy, like seaside color palette? Does that change things? And now we're back to the original. So hopefully, in your mind, the feelings you got for it or the story you're telling were shifting a little bit as we looked at the different versions. But why, right? Like, again, this is kind of wiggly. Well, if you've spent time around art students or taken any art classes yourself, they'll often talk about these things. So, right, there's different, I'm going to call them layers of a painting. You could call them components, but it's all these different things. So, you know, when we took away, when we put the trees over the city, we're messing with composition. When we block out the shadow, that's different light. Color palette, subjects. What if it's a dude sitting on the bed looking out? That's different. What if it's a dude in the same nightgown looking at. Again, we're telling different stories. So, and then there's all sorts of things like medium, like is it watercolor, is it oil? These things are all the tools that painters have to control the feelings. And we can see from the studies, and studies are like drafts of paintings that artists do, that the artist was thinking about this. So here's one where we have the light, and it's just focusing on the light and dark. Here's the one on composition and positioning. I think that's a tree and some fence. There's practicing the details of shading on the pillow. Look at all these notes about the woman sitting on the bed, right? It can seem like an accident, but it's very deliberate, and I would argue that's how a lot of good game design is as well. If we're doing our jobs right, no one knows that we have an entire notebook full of pages that look kind of like this for the entire game. So, thank you for indulging my artistic detour. And now we're back to games. The reason I went on this detour is that you're like, okay, testing a story is wiggly, but testing feelings, that's even weirder. Like, the feelings are in the computer. Like, what do I do with that? Like, shit. So the way I think of it is that game narrative has many of the same layers as a painting and a few of their own. So I'm sure I've left some out here. And there's so many things going on at any given point. Let's say you've just found a treasure and now you're going to take it to the townsperson. You know, there's the dialogue of what you're actually saying, and I feel like people talk about that a lot, but there's also so much more going on. There's the environment design. There's the set dressing. You know, do we feel closed in? Is this cluttered? Is it sparse? There's the characterization. What does the actual NPC you're looking at, what do they look like? How do they hold themselves? Do they look happy to see you? Do they not look happy to see you? There's music and the sound design going on. There's also the lighting. There's context. What's happened up until this point? You know, did we expect to find the treasure? Did we not expect to find the treasure? Who knows? And then there's the gameplay itself, which I would argue that these things should all be under the purview of narrative. It's not just farm it off to the writers so they write the dialogue. These are all the layers. And the reason we test it is because the outside is your game, and then it goes into this black box. That's the player. And the player has their own context and experiences. And, you know, maybe they're really hungry, or they had a bad day at work, or, you know, they just don't like this kind of game, whatever. Like, the players have their own stuff going on. And then really it's the player's feelings. So this is even wigglier. And I'll acknowledge that, you know, we can all think of probably games, books, movies that we really liked, it really landed with us, and our friend or our partner is like, that's just not for me, right? So lots of different layers, but I think we're down to like the nadir of the chaos and the wiggliness, and now we'll try to make some sense of it. And this is at least how I made sense of it making Call of the Golden Valley. So this is me putting on my engineering hat, and I want to be very clear about my underlying assumptions. I believe that if it works in isolation, it will work better in context. And this is what I mean of if you're trying to make a scene that's sad, if the music sounds sad on its own, it will sound even sadder when, you know, you're seeing the puppy getting carried away from its mother and you've got the volumetric lighting and it's all very cinematic. With the really important caveat of that you need to know which direction everything should be heading at this point. So this was fairly easy for me, being the entire creative department of my studio. I could just kind of sit down and contemplate this, but I imagine if you're at a bigger studio, this requires certain departments that maybe don't talk to each other all the time, getting on the same page very early in development to make sure that everyone's very clear about what moments in the game are meant to be supporting which player emotions. This is how we did it. So the bottom here is the different story beats, and we just plotted it out as this is the key information that the player needs to get. Like, your friend's not there, your dad's available for hints, and kind of what we hope that the player character, and therefore the player, are feeling. So when you go to meet your friend and she's not there, we're kind of hoping for like concern with maybe a tinge of frustration. And then here, this is just what the different NPCs can say about it, and what information there is. And yeah, then some to-dos where I was thinking, oh, actually, we should have this player say this. The top bit is what our musician / sound designer, Ben, did. I was super happy to have brought him on very, very early in the process because we could talk about the story, the narrative arc, and this is him. I believe the right axis is basically like drama, and the x-axis is time. And you can see that there's like these little spokes, and basically we're being puppet masters of emotion here, hopefully. But this is all to say that I would argue that if you don't know the answers to what should the player be feeling at this specific moment, then you're certainly not ready to test the story because you don't have a hypothesis to test yet. So really the underlying assumption is that if you can ask yourself, does this layer at this part of the game support the player feeling what you want them to feel, and you ask yourself this question, you're not asking the player this, but you're getting to the answer of this by asking the player other things. If this is true for every beat and kind of layer of your story, then I would argue at the end you'll have a 5, 10, 50-hour game that's mostly landing how you want it to. I'm also going to give a caveat here that by testing story, I'm really meaning like testing for how it's landing and if it's engaging and if it's telling the story and giving the emotions that you were hoping it would tell. We're not talking about kind of the QA, like one time the NPC says their aunt's name is Deborah, but then later they say their aunt's name is Donna. I consider that a garden variety QA problem. I don't think that's very specific to narrative. So we're really testing, like, you're making a story game, you're making a game with a really strong story. At the end of 3 years, will you have made something that's telling the story that you've set out to tell? So, okay, how do we find out the answer to is this landing the way we want at this part, especially when we have to split everything up into different layers because the whole thing's not done until it's done. First, we isolate the layer, and this will look really different for each different kind of layer, but I have examples of specific layers that we did and kind of what we learned from that. We have asked focused questions. So if anyone, there's a great talk at 9:30 this morning by a user research designer at PicPoc, which was, is my game fun? Yeah, we asked questions that are a little more focused than was it fun? Revise that layer very quickly. And that's where I have some tools and examples that either if you're an engineer, you can think, ooh, I could give my writers that. Or if you're a writer and you're like, hey, we don't have that, you can take these videos and hand it to your engineering department. And then we do that until we're getting, yes, this part of the game is giving the feeling we want at this specific time. And this is basically what we did for 3.5 years. So isolate the script. Table read. So if you come from a film and television background, this is very familiar. It's basically everyone sits down at a table and they just read the lines. No one's moving about or anything. This was at my co-working space, which is a co-working space for screen-based people. So this is me and a bunch of film and television people and one games person figuring out how to table read an interactive dialogue. And I'm proud to say that I got a table full of writers and actors. They know what a variable is now because we were using ink, which is like the runtime because, right, we have to pick stories and then we have to jump and the story is just a little too nonlinear to print it out as a screenplay. We all did it, but here we're we're not playing the game on the laptops. I want to be really clear. We're just basically looking at an interactive screenplay, and everyone had a part to play, and we spent about 3.5 hours going through most of the 1,300 lines of dialogue. And this was a really interesting exercise because not only did it let us know, wow, that line had a lot of information and maybe we should break that up, or hey, Maddy, we know you've been living in Australia for 6 years, but we don't actually say things like that. What if we say it this way? Which is very helpful. And just find out what information is being given verbally, because we give the player a lot of cues through the environment, and we give, through UI and all sorts, and found objects, but what's actually coming through the dialogue. And what was interesting here was I got the feedback that people thought that we were really focusing on how dangerous the Australian countryside is. Like, the NPCs keep telling the player, yeah, the valley's really dangerous, the valley's really dangerous. So people were like, I mean, that's a bit of a stereotype, isn't it? Everyone already thinks everything in Australia is going to try to kill them when they come here. Do we want that? But that was I was okay with that layer being a little heavy on the dangerous because the rest of the game actually depicts it as quite beautiful. So we have a little bit of contrast and it balances out, but just know, it's a good piece of awareness to know, okay, this is leaning a little heavy on this. Do we want to change it? Do we not want to? Isolate the puzzle. So this is more conventional playtesting, but at a certain point you have to basically dox people online and connect with red string who everyone is. And this was not about, hey, do you think the game idea is a good idea? This was just, can you match these people and do you feel like a clever detective when you do it? So we play tested this, and I don't think we even really told people what the rest of the story was. We were just your job is to dox these people online, and for people who don't know that term, it basically means match the person in real life to their online username by using the in-game computer and Googling them and marking off what you think is important. And we did not test anything else. We didn't test, is it pretty? We did not test, is this giving you feelings about finding your friend. It's just, did you feel like a clever detective? Because that's what this part of the game and the gameplay is meant to serve. Isolate the choice. So this is Inkle. It's a markup-driven thing. So this is what all the people in the photo a couple slides ago were looking at while we were going through. And this is what it looks like when you program it, and you can see it diverts. Here's what it looks like. It's just an interactive screenplay, and then these are kind of hyperlinks that you can click on. And this was really good for testing player choice. One thing that I found was, you are playing as a character. It's not a faceless character. She has her own thoughts and opinions and kind of moods, but you don't want to get people to a point where they're like, no, that's really stupid. I just want to yell at that character. How dare they? And this made it really, really easy to just grab whoever had the misfortune of sitting next to me that day and be like, hey, you got 3 minutes? And sort of give them a little bit of context, have them play through it and ask, what choices did you want to make? Did you want to make choices that were not offered to you? Did the choices seem too similar? And we're just focusing on that. And again, super easy to iterate, because if they're like, wow, I don't like either of these, I can type that as fast as I can think of it, right? Very, very quick. And then this all just gets funneled into the game engine. Isolate the chapter. So this was for the demo, because we do have to have a demo, and this is where it is a little vertical slicey, and this was actually a good test that our hypothesis of when all the layers come together, they kind of work better than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And this is how you drop people in the middle of the story. You get your dev team to add some splash, I am my own dev team. You add some splash screens, and this is for the demo, and this covers 30 to 45 minutes of gameplay that if they had the full thing, they would have been playing. But we wanted to sort of zoop them to a part that made sense to have be the Steam demo. And there's a couple things in the demo that aren't, that we just close in a little bit to have that one scene be a little bit more of a neatly tied bow than it is in the game. But that's what we kind of needed to say, okay, what will happen if we have people play a sort of self-contained, almost at production value, sort of 15-minute chunk of the game. So I love splash screens to move people around in the narrative. Then isolate the mechanic playtest again. So at some point you figure out where your friend is and you have to go into the valley to find her. And we give you some compass bearings. We teach you earlier how to use a compass. You rotate it to the bearing and then you walk in a straight line. This used to be a full-on orienteering simulator, which I'll stand by is fun, but for playtesting told us very early on that the audience for orienteering simulators and the audience we are targeting for Call of the Golden Valley are almost maybe two separate circles. And so we went back to, why did we even have an orienteering simulator here in the first place? And what I really wanted to replicate was the feeling, if you've ever been hiking in the really remote bush and you're just doing paper map navigation, it's this feeling of kind of self-reliance and confusion and also like, man, I hope I'm doing this right. And this is what I wanted to give to the players. However, being a first-time game designer, I think I really overestimated how much it would take to confuse players. And it turns out that mostly like telling them which direction to walk in and then having them walk for 50 or 100 game meters without any sort of validation gets us about where we're going. We don't need to like actually take the bearing and figure out a good way to navigate a contour map. But I'm super glad we playtested this early because again, and we knew what the purpose of the level was. It was not to build a really cool orienteering simulator. It was to give the people the feeling of being alone in nature and self-reliant. So finding out that people felt frustrated and scared was not how we wanted them to feel. And then we took away the compass entirely, and they were saying kind of like, well, they're like, I was really looking forward to like going out into the bush and finding my friends. So we ended up at this happy medium that's a lot simpler, and that's been testing well. So you've isolated your layer and you're testing it, and now how do you know if it's doing the thing? And this was covered in more depth and better at the talk this morning, but basically asking questions, what did you think? Did you like it? Was it fun? These are the questions that people answer in your Steam reviews. And I would argue that even if you've given them something more than an Australian refrigerator to speak to, these still aren't great questions because chances are you're playtesting with people who love and care about you. And maybe they don't want to tell you that they were really confused. So they'll say, yeah, it's great, darling, like ship it. So I would just argue that these are never super great questions to be asking at development stages in the game because, if there's something wrong with the game, we all want our friends and family to tell us and not angry random people on the internet, right? One of those things is better than the other. So really the more specific you can get to test the hypothesis. So this would depend on sort of what you're actually testing, but just some examples. How would you describe the game based on this part? How would you describe it to other people? How does this music make you feel? Or what does this music remind you of? Which character was your favorite? Which character was your least favorite? Because, if we had 4 Australian refrigerators and they all had different personalities and players talked to all 4 refrigerators, now the question of which character is your favorite is actually something that people might be able to answer. They might have a favorite refrigerator. This one had, this one told good jokes. I like this one. What did you find most frustrating? And sometimes you want the player to be a little frustrated. Maybe that's like the puppet master string you're pulling. But you need to be really clear. If they're feeling frustrated at a point where you don't want them to feel frustrated, that's something that you want to take on board and hopefully address. For us, it was like which puzzle solution was the most satisfying? Were there any that like felt kind of meh? And then for choices, kind of like was there anything you wanted to do or say, but you felt like the game wasn't giving the option? And these, I felt like we got really good, clear answers from people because these are making something kind of wiggly very concrete. And so even if people really want to help saying, what did you think? Okay, what did I think about what? I could tell you lots of things, but what's most useful? So it's part of you as the designer to sit and think, what hypothesis am I testing right now, and what questions are going to get me the answer to that? So if you're asking this, hopefully after that, you can go home and say, wow, is that compass level in the forest towards the end of the game support the player feeling self-reliant and, maybe a little nervous about finding their friend and a little nervous about their navigation skills. And we can match that with how we hope the player is feeling. So these are some examples of feedback we got along the way. This handwriting's a little sketchy, but this was when we were play testing the detective part, and what was your favorite thing? And they said, finding a business card and getting a new search term, that's detective work, baby, exclamation part. Which was very sweet. And that kind of gave us a good indication that, yes, people are feeling like clever detectives. We, very, very early on, the first time I ever showed the game in public, I asked people, how would you describe the game to a friend? And someone said a cozy mystery game. And I was like, oh, it's not meant to be cozy. How dare you? But then I realized that, we didn't have any sound design, and we do have kind of a low poly style, and in this case, the customer is always right. So then this really informed our sound design. I'm really glad that I asked this question early, because we could lean creepier than maybe we would have gone into the sound design to realize, okay, some of the layers are going a little cozy. Let's go really not cozy in other directions, and go not cozy in the UI and all of that to sort of make it not telegraph. And we really did that in the trailer. The trailer, I think, makes the game look a little bit scarier than it is, but it's really to get away from the cozy. And then we did test the game in alpha and beta from end to end. It's 5 to 10 hours to play, so we didn't do this very often, because no matter how much people love you, there are only so many times that they will play your mostly linear 5 to 10 hour computer game over and over and over again. But asking specifically about the pacing, did anything go too fast or too slow? This is when we had taken out the compass, and they're like, that felt a bit rushed. I wanted to kind of feel like I was in the forest. And it's like, oh, great. We have half a mechanic we can put back in. Solved. But we had to ask. And these are all feelings. What did people feel? They felt cozy, because cozy is kind of a feeling. They felt rushed. They felt like a detective. So I think really we're testing for feelings. Cool. Now, for the rest of the talk, I'm going to kind of put my engineering hat on, if this slide did not look engineering enough to people. And this is how we actually did this, because you're like, cool, great, I'm sold. I'm going to protect my investment. I'm going to test my story. How did we do this really fast without making ourselves, and mostly me, go crazy? So my underlying belief is that, and I say this as an engineer, that code-based narrative iteration is expensive and slow. Code anything is expensive and slow. Again, I say this as an engineer. If you can cut code out of the equation for your development process, do it. So if we want to test narrative and have someone take a look at it, what did you think of this? Oh, it's all right, blah, blah, blah. Then within an hour, I want to go back and grab them again and say, hey, what do you think of it now? The way we did this is code-free building blocks to control the narrative and the gameplay. And I'll have a video example of this so you can see it in action. But your building blocks are going to be different depending on what type of game and what type of gameplay you have. But for our game, which I would say is like a fancy walking simulator style game, our super essential building blocks were basically things you can click on, and what do we do when you pick it up and when you put it down. We actually have a lot of narrative moments when you find things. Checking game state. Has something in the game already happened? Does the player know about this? Have they already found this other thing? Playing dialogue, basically making a comment or starting a conversation, and then telling the game, reporting back, hey, something happened. So then it all flows together. Also useful little scripts, and none of these Actually, clickable object's a bit of a monster, but that's my fault because I wrote it 3 years ago when I didn't really know how to write code for games. But the rest of these are like less than 20 lines of code. Most of them are probably less than 10. So very easy to put together. Also, for our game, play a sound, advance the time of day, play a cutscene, activate an object, make something like now the wombat is findable, play an animation, stuff like that. This will vary for your game and what the sort of gameplay loop looks like, but I imagine everyone here can kind of sit and think what would be like the 5 or 10 fundamental things that a narrative designer would want to mess around with and have control over in the project. So the next slide is an actual example of me. I think I sped it up twice, and it's when you find a picture of your friend, you can decide based on what's already happened what you want to say. And you'll see that no code is getting written. The screen recorder didn't capture that you'll often there's enum values, so you'll say instead of here undefined, this is me scrolling on the enum thing, it says player finds expulsion letter. So we have all the game events in an enum. You can't do typos. You just scroll down and pick it out of a menu. And you say, or they find something else, and we can say it's an and or an or condition. If it's true, we play one conversation. If it's false, we play another conversation. And this lets us test things super duper quickly. And then I think also on exit, we're also going to tell the game that you found the photo of your friend. So I know this is really small. The main thing to take away here is that we are controlling what happens very quickly and without writing any code. So this would require your narrative team to be working in engine, but there is no writing code. And I think this is the final little bit. We're saying the extra action on exit is that we report ourselves as having found the picture. And we're done. So I'll show you the result in the affirmative. We have found, or actually first it goes, we haven't found this letter, and it gives extra context. And so the reason we might even be in this situation is you playtest and someone's like, I picked up the photo and it seemed really sad, but I don't feel sad about my friend. And you're like, oh yeah, that depends on what else you know. And then we say, okay, we'll put a conditional on that, try it again. So this is just, you find the photo and you don't really know anything about what's up with your friend.
Marissa never did pass up a chance for a selfie.
That's all. And I'm cheating a little bit because, right, we do have the lighting and the voice acting and everything in here, but you can imagine doing this as an earlier stage. Now here's the other one, when you have found out that she's been expelled from school and has told no one about it. And you'll also see me manipulating the state, which I'll talk about in the next slide, and saying, instead of actually going and finding the letter, we're just telling the game real quick, hey, we found the letter. Pretend like we found the letter.
Marissa looks so happy here.
Cool. Same event, different emotional impact, depending on what the player already knows. Done in less than 3 minutes. You could swap out whatever you want it predicated on. You could swap out whatever you want the player to say. You could test out different dialogues. You could do all sorts of things. But the point is that it's very quick and it's very cheap. So you can test out lots of things and figure out how you want it to feel. So many times I didn't even need to get someone else to test it because I would just play it and be like, ugh. That doesn't sound right. Maybe the voice acting line was just, they acted it too bright and cheery. It just doesn't work for some reason, and now we need to adapt. So, second underlying belief of this, playing your game 10,000 times is a waste of time, no matter how much you like your game. With a 5+ hour game, if you want to test a part in the middle, playing it for 2.5 hours, or maybe even speed running it for 20 minutes just to get to this one point where you can test this one moment, is not a good use of your or anyone's time. So our solution was really easy, manipulable game state. Right, I do have a computer science background. Yes, this is a list of every game variable represented as an empty game object that we turn on or off depending on whether that has happened in the game. There's about 100 of them, and so it's not going to cause any memory problems. And yes, are there more efficient ways to do it? I'm certain, but this is actually super handy from engineer Maddy to designer Maddy to be able to see what's happened very easily. And then also, more importantly, if I want to say, okay, we've made friends with this character, I don't have to go through the whole process of befriending the character. I just click the editor button saying report active, and now the game thinks we are friends with that character, and that lets me test how dialogue from there goes. Also, the story beats we just put in different save files, so we didn't have to just make it even easier. We can queue it up to exactly, when the player's done the full solve on the wall, and then we can test just from there. And because I'm slightly running out of time and I want there to be time for questions. So the results is we made a 5+ hour narrative game that mostly landed the way we wanted it to when we alpha and beta tested it and did do all the end-to-end testing. And we didn't lose our minds in the process. I'm here talking to you. Yes, I put sunscreen on my toothbrush instead of toothpaste this morning, but it's fine. It's totally fine. So the game will ship in 3 weeks, and we'll see if it was like commercial success, but at least I feel confident that we're shipping the story that I intended to ship. And whether, I think of good stories, we'll let the market decide, I guess, but I feel quite confident that the game we made was the game that we set out to make, and I think that's a nice accomplishment in itself. And again, sanity. So thank you, shameless plug. The game comes out in 3 weeks, wishlisted if you're interested, and I think we have time for questions. Yeah. What's the hardest part about getting started? Do you mean writing a game or just like testing a game or making a game? I think the hardest part is just like getting over your own sense of shame and like the idea that maybe there's someone out there better to like write the game and just be like, I'm gonna do it. And I think it's much easier to fix something that's imperfect than it is to start from scratch. So I don't know, like have a beer, just type something. Yeah. Yeah, in the back. Oh, and sorry, for the recording, they were asking what the hardest part of getting started, or how do you start?
Really good talk, resonated hugely. One of the things in my writing that I run into, because with games like these, you write so many lines of dialogue, and it's really easy to not put the feelings first and instead put like information first, which comes off really bland. How do you keep yourself thinking about the character over what you're trying to get across to the player?
Ooh, I love that question. The way I did this, because I wanted to be conscious of this, I did all the environment and found object design before I wrote any dialogue. And then I looked at what the environment was supporting, and then I looked at what the environment couldn't support, and that's the information that went in dialogue. Because otherwise I do think you get a little info dumpy. Yeah, in the front. Or sorry.
Thank you. That was really good. I was just wondering, when the voice actors you had together, and you were testing and practicing, was it their first time actually coming across the content, or were they already aware of their lines? Or
no, it was the first time for the table read, and then one of the table readers did end up being one of the voice actors, but everyone else was new, and the voice actors were all super professional, and I could just send them, I wrote a script to spit out the screenplay into an Excel file and send that to them, and where I thought they needed context or I thought they needed a little bit of extra hint, I would put that in a separate column, but most people were doing it cold, which I think was really good for table reading, and I think just part of the process for the voice actors.
Is that the reason I ask? Is like, did you have mental notes of the kind of emotional responses that certain scenes or sections you were expecting? And
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that's how I had big imposter syndrome directing voice actors, but I knew how I wanted it to sound, and I knew if we were hitting that note or not.
On voice acting, do you have any advice on iteration for stuff that is challenging to iterate, such as, for example, recording voice lines?
Nah, as far as I was considered, just for my own sanity, the script was locked once we recorded it, but that's why we did that dead last and why we tested the story before we did it. Yeah. And then also you can have the actors like record some safety lines of just like, I don't know, what's this? No, thank you, blah, blah, blah. Like, just so you have a little bit to play with if you do need to change something. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
How do you, for example, some things only really hit the first time, like big reveals or like finding out information or like, so how do you iterate on that? Because sometimes you go like, oh, okay, you didn't get the impact that you wanted, and you show them the same line again, but we'll never have that first reveal impact again. Do you find someone else, or do you just say imagine?
I do both. So if there was like a big moment and it didn't land quite the way I wanted, I will show it to someone again. But obviously they've seen it before, the element of surprise is taken out, so you're aware of that, and then also try to show it to some new people. So this is where I would say having a long list of able and willing playtesters is very handy. I was also very surprised at how many people will just want to help you test your game. It's very nice. But I think don't be afraid to ask people. Yeah.
Hello. So I was thinking, how do you balance the player feeling smart and also having a mystery game where you don't want them to guess who the killer or whatever happened early on? And is there a percentage that I want the players to have a pretty solid guess who it is at 70% of the game? Or is there a formula in the first place?
This could be a separate talk about like detective games specifically, and I would be happy to nerd out about this with anyone, but the short answer is that you need to find a way for the player to tell the game what they know without the game tipping its hand. So being like, who do you think it was? Option A, B, C, or D, and you're like, well, I never thought about D, but now that you say it, it makes a lot of sense, is not the most satisfying experience for the player. So that's like a whole sort of mechanic design situation, and it's why people often think like, oh, an Agatha Christie book will make a great video game, but unless it's done very carefully, it actually doesn't. But hopefully this game feels like a detective book you can walk around in. That's the whole thing I'm trying to go for. Yeah, cool. How are we doing on time? I don't want to keep people from lunch.
A little over.
We have 5 minutes? Or we're a little over. Okay, so I can't stand it when people keep me between like me and food. So I'll be here if you want to chat, but everyone else can go get lunch. Thank you.